I'm very happy for this privilege of being able to do these teaching sessions. The book of Deuteronomy is a book that has been next to the book of Psalms, the book that appears most in the New Testament. You get over 80 references to the book of Deuteronomy in the New Testament. It's a series of sermons. Actually, Moses was coming to the end of his life. He was getting ready to leave the people, and he wanted them to get used to being without him and to continue faithfully in the land that they were going to possess. And he gave this book as a series of sermons. There were about 5 sermons, and he first recounts their history. This is what God did with you. And then he calls them to commit themselves to God and to his ways. And so as an example of that, he presents the laws that have been given. And then he brings them to renew the covenant. And so they renew their covenant with God. And then, of course, he gets ready for his death. He thanks God for everything that God has done, and it's a triumphant ending to his life. Now, some people think that this is like a constitution for the nation of Israel. So, some detailed laws don't fully apply today. But those laws, even those laws that don't fully apply today, give a window of God's heart. This is the way God thinks. This is what the type of behavior he expects from us. And they are useful to us because they give you a window of the heart of God. For example, there is capital punishment, death for adultery. Now, we don't do that anymore today, and the church doesn't do that. But that tells us how serious God considers this sin. It tells us some things that God doesn't like, some things that God likes. For example, he gives them different laws about eating and what to eat and what not to eat. Now, this is to show that they are to be a different people. They are different to the rest of their neighbors. And these were identification markers for them. So, this is the book, and we are just going to look at 2 passages from this book. The first one, I'm not going to read the passage because I'll be going through verse by verse, is Deuteronomy chapter 6. If you have a Bible, you may want to turn to it. I'm using the ESV, but it's okay if you have a different translation. Deuteronomy chapter 6, and we are going to look at verse 10 to 19. How to avoid the pitfalls of prosperity. Now, when someone found out that I'm speaking on this, he said, "Why are you speaking on prosperity to a nation that is bankrupt?" And I think there's a point there. But all people, even in a bankrupt nation, seek prosperity. And that's good. We are supposed to advance in life in every sphere, including the material. But in this quest for prosperity, we can break principles. So warnings that the Bible gives about that could be helpful to us. So we come to chapter 6. Right at the start, Moses gave the history, how God saved them and brought them out of Egypt. And then, of course, it continues several times. He reminds them of the history. Then he goes into giving some general rules, and our passage comes inside those general rules. After the general rules, he goes to specific rules. The second passage that we are going to study comes from that section. So the general rules, fairly early in that section, is the 10 Commandments. And then after the 10 Commandments, there is a basic description of what it means to be faithful to God. So you have that we have to love the Lord with all our heart and our soul and to meditate on the Word. A general thing, what it means to be committed to God. And then loving, it talks about loving God. If you love God, you will be careful when you go to the new land. And surprisingly, after that very stirring call to read the Bible, to meditate on the Bible and all of that, immediately he goes on to talk about the dangers of prosperity. Today there's a lot of preaching about the promise and the prospect of prosperity. But in the Bible, especially in the New Testament, it talks a lot about the dangers of prosperity. Well-known preacher Haddon Robinson says, for every verse in the Bible that tells us of the benefits of wealth, there are 10 that tell us of the dangers of wealth. So Jesus himself said in Luke 18, 28, 24 and 25, how difficult it is for those who have wealth to enter the kingdom of God. For it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich person to enter the kingdom of God. Another well-known preacher, Erwin Lutzer, has said, few people have the spiritual resources needed to be both wealthy and godly. But when you have both, it's a great testimony to the glory of a godly life. So we are not talking against wealth, but we are talking about the dangers of prosperity. So we come to verse 10. Verses 10 to 12 says, now when you go to this new land, remember to maintain the perspective of grace. You are people who have been blessed by God. This is not by your own strength. He knows that they could forget God with their new wealth and prosperity. So he emphasizes grace. Now grace is one of the most important themes of the book of Deuteronomy. Everything we do is because of the grace of God. The giving of the land was the fulfilling of a promise that had been given all early to Abraham. And over the years, God has worked and worked and worked, and is now about to fulfill this promise to give them the land. Verse 10 says, when the Lord your God brings you into the land that he swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob, and to give you with great and good cities that you did not build. He's covering 65 years, and he talks about how now God is going to give you prosperity and wealth. These are people who are going to be like the newly rich that you find even in Sri Lanka. And they can forget the long view. They can forget that God is a God who keeps his promises and works in history. And he's the one to trust in, and break his principles for temporary gain. Now there are two emphases in these two verses, in verses 10 and 11. One, the greatness of the land they are going to, and two, the blessings were not earned. So he says, with great and good cities that you did not build, houses full of all good things that you did not fill, cisterns that you did not dig, vineyards and olive trees that you did not plant. 4 times that you did not. In other words, be careful about taking credit for your successes and your prosperity. It's the warning about forgetting that they didn't deserve. And next, there's a warning about the possibility of forgetting God's grace. He says, when you eat and are full, take care, this is verse 11 and 12, take care lest you forget the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. So, when we become successful, we can forget those who helped us to come to this place. People who paid for our education, people who helped us get on our feet, and most importantly, we could forget how important God has been. Now there's an interesting word that comes here. It's a word that comes 65 times in Deuteronomy, a very important word. In the Hebrew, it's the word shamar. And what it means is be careful, pay careful attention to. You see, in the Christian life, one of the mother of sin often is carelessness. That's what I have found in my life too. When I'm careless, I can go into directions that I shouldn't be going. And so Deuteronomy is a book that says, be careful, be careful, be careful, be careful. And here he's saying, be careful not to forget what God did. Be careful about taking credit for your success. Because if you do that, you will begin to think, my success depends on my work, on my dedication, on my ideas. And you could begin to neglect God in the process. You can possibly get so busy with maintaining and progressing your wealth that you have no time to spend with God, reading the Bible and praying. Or you miss church because you have so much work to do. Or you push to make money. In the push to make money, you may break principles. You may underpay your workers. You may follow unethical practices. So just today I was talking to a young entrepreneur and who started on a business. And well, I didn't talk to him. He gave me a message on WhatsApp, audio message on WhatsApp. And he was saying, everybody is breaking the laws. And I'm sorely tempted to do the same. I'm trying to be a Christian in this business. It is so easy to break the law. Now, the most dangerous result of forgetting God is that we get proud. I did this. By my strength, I was able to do that. When you get proud, you get spiritually weak. Proverbs 16:18 says, pride goes before destruction and a haughty spirit before a fall. When I was leader of Youth for Christ, I supervised our drug rehab work for many years. And one of the sad realities we have is that some people come out of it and stay out. Others come out and they're very proud of the success they have had. And they become very critical of others. In their pride, they become very critical, scolding others. And when I see that, I know we are in trouble. We are this guy. And very often, they fall back into drugs. Because when you're proud, you're weak. You don't have the strength that grace provides. And then you are unable to have the victory over this. So, we must maintain the grace perspective. So verse 12 tells us how to maintain the grace perspective. Take care, lest you forget the Lord. Now the Lord is described here as the one who brought them out of the land of slavery, out of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. Remember who you were before you came to this place. Don't forget your past. And that's a thing that the Bible often talks about. In Ephesians 2:11 and 12. Twice Paul says, remember. Remember who you were. You were separated from Christ. You had no hope. You were without God. You didn't belong to the commonwealth of God. And then he says, but now in Christ Jesus, you who were once far off have been brought near by the blood of Christ. Remember your past. Don't think that you are the one who did this on your own. Remember in the past, of course, makes us grateful. You know, grateful people are happy people. They're always looking at what God has done to them Oh, there are bad people who hurt them and all of that. But more important than the people who hurt them is the God who loves them, who has been good to them. Grateful people are happy people. And that is the greatest wealth that one could have. And then remembering the past also keeps you humble. And humble people are strong people. Because when you're humble, you depend on grace. And grace is what gives us strength to live the Christian life. So, Paul is saying, Moses is saying, maintain the grace perspective. Now we come to the next point, next major point that he's making. Follow a God-fearing lifestyle. Follow a God-fearing lifestyle. We come to verse 13. It is the Lord your God you shall fear, him you shall serve, and by his name you shall swear. He gives three things about the life of fearing God. Three things. Firstly, you fear God. It is the Lord your God you shall fear. You know, in the Old Testament, the fear of the Lord is something like faith in the New Testament. It is trusting God, reverential fear, honoring him and obeying him. Part of the fear is the fear of the consequences of disobedience, and also the fear of displeasing God. But at the heart, it is an attitude of humble submission to God. Now, when you fear God, when you're a God-fearing person, then you are careful not to abuse your wealth. You are careful not to hurt others in your quest for success. You won't exploit your employees. You won't be above the law and think you can bribe your way out of the problems and challenges. You won't easily miss your devotional life because you want to please and stay close to God. It is dangerous and foolish to go away from fearing God. And then fearing God also includes the consequences of disobedience. God in James 4:6 says, God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Now, opposing the proud is something to be scared of. We don't want to have God on the other side to us. So we are humble because we fear God. That's the first thing in a life of fearing God. The second thing is serving God. Now there's a very interesting play on words here. The noun slavery in verse 12, God delivered you out of slavery. Now that noun, the verb of that noun is used here. The corresponding verb. And that verb is you shall serve him. There it's translated serve. But it's the same word as the word slave. So we were freed from the bondage of slavery in Egypt, in sin, and we were given the free, and it was that slavery was replaced by the freedom of being servants of God. One slavery is replaced by the freedom of being servants of God. So we are happy slaves because we are serving a loving master. We are not proud slaves because we know that everything comes from him. We fear God, so we are humble. But we are thrilled about the privilege of serving God. It's a great honor. And we don't want to waste time pushing ourselves forward and being proud because he is the one who has made us. We have nothing to prove. Yeah, we have been accepted by God. We are his children. We have nothing to prove. The only thing we want to prove is that God is a blessed Savior. You know, a rich person, a successful person who is also humble and has a servant spirit is a beautiful combination. I have seen some of those people, some lay people who are rich but also humble and are with a servant spirit. Of course, as a preacher, for me, success is often success in writing, in preaching. So there were three people when I was about in my 20s, early 20s, three people whom I admired greatly. Billy Graham, the most famous preacher in his time, whom people knew was a humble man. And I saw that humility after I had spoken once, and he came and spoke to me. And he lifted me up by what he said. And Ken Taylor, who wrote the Living Bible, a man who took the time to write to me when he found out that I'm interested in writing. John Stott, probably the greatest Bible teacher of his time, who all these great people had a servant spirit. You know, I don't know whether you know the name Mark Hatfield. He's dead now. He was a senator in the US Senate from the state of Oregon. For many years he was senator. Deeply respected, a good Christian, very successful. In fact, he was a candidate for the nomination for the presidency, but he stepped down and gave way to Richard Nixon to come instead of him. But Mark Hatfield was a Christian. Now, another well-known preacher, Howard Hendricks, says how he went for a father-son banquet in Washington, D.C., where fathers and sons came, not banquet, it was a breakfast. And Mark Hatfield was there with his son. So Howard Hendricks spoke at this meeting, and after he had finished speaking, he was talking to the people, and I saw, where's Hatfield? I wonder whether Hatfield is still here. And he saw that Hatfield was stacking chairs and picking up the napkins that had been left behind. And Howard Hendricks, talking about this, says, "Ladies and gentlemen, if you are impressed that you are a senator that you are a United States senator, you don't stack chairs and pick up napkins." He was a great man who had a spirit of a servant. And he says, the people who are impressed by their success do not serve, they live to be served. So, servants, we fear God, we adopt a lifestyle of servanthood, and then by his name you shall swear. You take an oath of allegiance to God. This is a thing that Christians do often. In my Methodist tradition, we have a thing called the covenant service. The first Sunday of every year, we renew our covenant to God and say, "Lord, we are going to live for you only." So it's an oath of allegiance to God. And verse 14 says, "You shall not go after other gods, the gods of the peoples who are around you." So you swear. Two other times in Deuteronomy, we are told that God swears. God swears that he will give them the land. So God swears to look after us. And in return, we swear to serve God. So unfortunately, in the history of Israel, when they became prosperous, they also became careless. And the power made them forget the oath that to serve God only. So for us, I think it's good to have several times in our lives, several days of, "Lord, I commit myself to you afresh. I want to serve you only, no other. Please help me." So then we come to the next point on fearing God, verse 15. God does not tolerate such unfaithfulness. When we do that, it says, For the Lord your God in your midst is a jealous God, lest the anger of the Lord your God be kindled against you, and he destroy you from the face of the earth. You see, 4 times in Deuteronomy, God is described as jealous. That word actually is the same, can be also translated as zealous. When God is zealous for his people, he's zealous for their commitment, for their godliness. And each time, the supreme place of God can be replaced by another. And then it becomes zealous. God becomes jealous. For many of us today, our God is not another God, quote unquote God. Very often we have other gods like career. A career becomes our God. Ambition to succeed, good thing. But if it replaces God as the most important thing, then that can become our God. And sports can become a God. Sports can become an ideal. Studies, success of the family, all of these things can replace God from our life. If they do, God will act out his jealousy. This passage says, it says, and destroy them from off the face of the earth. Unfaithfulness in the Old Testament is described as adultery or whoredom. Jealousy, it shows how jealousy is appropriate way to describe that. Sometimes you hear people say, oh, her husband is having an affair, but he'll come back, no problem. Why is she getting so upset that the husband is having an affair? He'll come back. That's not the Christian attitude to commitment. If you're married to somebody, you're married totally to that person only, and you are not going to. And that wife has a cause to be jealous. Jealous not in a way that hurts and punishes in a bad way, but rather jealous for total commitment from the spouse. And so God is upset. Adultery is not tolerated. That's an aspect of love. Okay, so that's the life of fearing God. Now, verses 6 to 19, he says, have sanctified ambitions. First, he gives different aspects of ambition, of proper ambition. The first one is a wrong ambition. Don't have wrong ambitions. And he describes that as testing God. This is the verse that Jesus quoted when he was asked to jump down from the pinnacle of the temple. Jesus quoted this verse. You shall not put the Lord your God to the test as you tested him at Massa. The story is told to us in Exodus 17, where the people said, give us water to drink. And Moses said, why do you quarrel with me? Why do you test the Lord? And the people responded by scolding Moses and bringing them out of Egypt. They preferred to be in Egypt rather than thirsty like this. And then verse 4, that is in Exodus, what shall we, God tells Moses tells God, what shall I do with these people? They are almost ready to stone me. And what happened was that God provided water. But the place was called Massa, meaning testing. Because they tested the Lord by saying, is the Lord among us or not? Testing the Lord is saying, I must have this. It may be something good, but it's saying, I must have this. Now, water is a good thing, but they said, I have to have this. And by doing that, they exhibited uncrucified desire. And And today we are seeing that a lot. People say, I have to be successful. So they will take performance-enhancing drugs to do well in their sports, destroy their health. But even parents sometimes allow their children to live an unhealthy life so that they can succeed in life. Pastors today, with ambition to succeed or things like that, very often we are seeing them leaving their congregations and going elsewhere, away from the call of God. John Wesley has an interesting story in his diary, journals, about a lady whose husband, an old lady whose husband was dying. And she said, Lord, he must live. He can't die. He can't die. He can't die. It was time for him to die. But she didn't want him to die. And she kept insisting, no, God, no. He must live. He must live. He must live. And he lived. But his mind was destroyed. His mind had been affected, his brain. And he was talking nonsense, and she couldn't believe what he was saying. Then finally she said, Lord, if it's your time to take him, take him. And he immediately changed. He thanked his wife, kissed her, and said, thank you for releasing me. And he died. And she had the peace of God of knowing that he had gone to be with God. A strange story indeed. And yet it tells us how ambition, wrong ambition, could be so dangerous. Then, that's the first thing about ambition. The second thing is, have an ambition to diligently obey. Verse 17, you shall diligently keep the commandments of the Lord and the commandments of the Lord your God, his testimonies, his statutes, which he has commanded you. Now that word diligently is that same word, careful, be careful, shamar. Here again, the ambition is to be obedient to God. People who want to please God, they want to obey God. So they study his word because of a desire to please God. They discuss with others, how can I apply this in my life? They ask, is this the right thing to do? They ask others. There was a book, famous book called by Charles Sheldon, called In His Steps. And this was a church, it was a novel. It was a church where the people said, before we do anything, we are going to ask the question, what would Jesus do? WWJD. And that's what they did. And doing that transformed their whole life, because they looked at everything from the perspective of Jesus. You have commanded, Psalm 119 verse 4, you have commanded your precepts to be kept diligently. Verse 5, oh, that my ways may be steadfast in keeping your statutes. Lord, are you telling me something that I'm doing which I shouldn't do? Well, I want to do it. I want to give it up because I love you. Do you want me to do something that I should do? Lord, I want to do it. There was a big drug chain in America, a pharmacy chain in North America, called the Eckerd Drugs. I think it has joined up with another one now and has a different name. And that was owned by Mr. Eckerd. And Mr. Eckerd became a Christian. And this was during the time before the internet had become so popular that people, if they wanted pornography, they would go to a drugstore and buy a porn magazine. So Mr. Eckerd walked into one of his drugstores and he looked and he saw all these pornographic magazines in his drugstore. And he thought to himself, What am I selling these people? And he went and told his board, we must take all the porn out of our stores. And the board said, are you crazy? You're going to say goodbye to millions and millions of dollars. That's one of the best-selling things that we have in our pharmacies. He said, no, I'm serious. We have to give this up. And he did that. And somebody asked him, why? Why did you do this? Is it because you became a Christian? And he said, why else would I want to throw away millions and millions of dollars? God was important. And if God didn't like something, it is to be given away. So we want to please God. Then another ambition, pursue good character. And you shall do what is right and good in the sight of God. There are two very good words, important words here. Right and good. Right has the idea of straight, not crooked or twisted. By extension, that has the idea of something morally straight, right, upright, innocent. They're talking about a person of integrity. So you shall do what is right, and then good. That is something that is pleasing, desirable, can refer to the quality of moral goodness. See, we are talking about good people. God's people are good people. You know, people had an understanding about Christians, I think about 50 years ago. These people are good people. They care for others. And now I'm beginning to wonder whether we have lost that name, whether we are still trusted as being good people. I have been trying to push Christians to be accountable to others. And almost always the response I get is, how can I be accountable? There's no one I can trust. These are people, I can't trust them. I don't know how to share because I don't know what he'll do with it. You know, some people are talking, and when they are talking, you're thinking to myself, now he's saying this, but what is he really saying? What is the real truth? You know, you can't trust the motives of a person. We are talking about people who never will hit back, who refuse to cut others in order to progress in life, who refuse to cut corners. You know, these people would be called naive and simplistic in today's world. But these are the people that God honors. Good people. How important for us to pursue goodness. It was said about Barnabas that he was a good man. And that is another of those things, to be good. We won't break principles to win a battle. We won't slander an enemy when that enemy is slandering you. That enemy was once my friend, and he told me some secrets about him, and I can really fix him. He's slandering me. I can give him a good dose of his medicine. But no, I'm a Christian. I will keep the confidence he had on me. We won't lie to get out of a situation. You won't use underhand methods to win an election, whether it's in church or in society. You keep your promises however hard it is. You know, sometimes a Christian, I remember walking with someone, and we were walking along. I was a student, and we were walking, and suddenly he's missing. And we were wondering, where is he? And we looked back, and he was behind, asking us to come. One of his old girlfriends was coming. And he got scared when he saw her and went away. He had things to hide. These are people who take loans do sometimes. When the person they gave the loan to comes nearby, they run away, they move away. They make promises that they don't fulfill. Now sometimes we can't fulfill a promise for real, genuine reasons. Then we go to the person we made the promise to, and we talk to him, we explain situations, work out a new system to come out of this situation. Psalm 15 and verse 4 says, one who dwells in the holy hill swears to his own hurt and does not change. Swears to his own hurt and does not change. He made a promise. Now it's hurtful for him to fulfill that promise. But he's a Christian. He's God's person. He won't change the promise that he made. So, goodness. Now, we are told about the rewards of this life. You wonder, is it worthwhile? The rewards of this life. Verse 18 and 19. When you do this, it may go well with you, that you may go and take possession of the good land that the Lord swore to give to your fathers, by thrusting out your enemies from before you, as the Lord promised. The Lord will give victory. That is sure. Sometimes the way he brings victory will be through a circuitous route, and we are wondering what on earth is happening. The Bible talks a lot about patience in the Bible. In the New Testament, you get 62 references to patience given to Christians. Christians must be patient. So God takes time sometimes to bring his blessing, but he will bless us all the same. That's the value. We trust God. It really takes faith to follow God in today's world. Everybody is going the other way. Everybody is breaking their principles. And you think you're a fool for doing it. But God will bless. Sometimes in this life, some other times, always in the life to come. Sometimes in this life, I love the story of a priest in a village in France called Ars. Now this priest came into this village and he found that the place was full of filth. People were immoral, drunken, sexual sin, and clubs where terrible things were happening. And right from the start, he began to preach against sin. And the people were infuriated. They were angry. They started spreading stories about him. One lady stood outside his window with a baby and said, "This is the father. That is the father of this child." He used to spend nights in fasting and prayer. And the children and the people used to see his eyes, and they were red by night spent in prayer. And they said, look at him, he's drunk. He has been drinking all night. Finally, even the fellow priests were embarrassed by him. So somebody wrote a petition against this man. And for some reason, and sent to the bishop. For some reason, somebody sent him the petition. And he read, "Not a capable minister, true. Can't preach well, true. Not learned, true. Not many abilities, true." He read all these things and said, "Well, yeah, that's true. I'm true. I don't deserve this job." And he also signed and sent it to the bishop. After some time, the village changed. They had to close all their bars and clubs, and the place was just transformed. And someone from around, from outside, came to the village, saw the change, and congratulated a person in the village. And this man said, "We are just like other people, but there are some things that you can't do when there's a saint around. There are some things that you can't do when there are saints around. We need good people. And some of them are going to see the fruit in this life, but others will see it for sure in the life to come. There are many bitter people in the world today. They say, these people are successful, and see what they did, and I am suffering because of their ill. The final result of our service has not yet been revealed. The Bible says that God will honor. In Psalm 73, the psalmist was struggling. Why are these people like this? Why are they behaving like this? And I am suffering all in vain. I have tried to be faithful. And then he says, I went to the sanctuary of the Lord and I perceived their end. I realized where they are headed. The doctrine of judgment takes away bitterness. This is why it's so important for us to preach the doctrine of judgment, because that is a major motivation for the life of holiness. Do you want to be good? Well, God is a God who rewards righteousness. So there is a reward for righteousness. So it's not easy to be wealthy and godly, but it's wonderful when you find both. It's wonderful anyway to find people working hard towards becoming prosperous, and in the process of working hard, refusing to give up their principles, who are aware of the pitfalls of compromise and live in total obedience. Let's spend a moment or two in prayer, and we will ask God. You can pray silently. Maybe God spoke to you about some area of compromise, some decision that you need to make, some practice that you need to change. Just spend a little time silently.